forgotten by time. Places where the cold sinks into your bones, and the silence carries ancient things not meant for human eyes. Welcome to SpookyShade, where shadows breathe, and the stories they tell are never truly gone. Tonight, we step quietly into the heart of a cursed forest, where an abandoned outpost sleeps beneath layers of frost and memory. And something beneath the snow is beginning to stir. A gentle warning: keep your lights low. Trust what you feel, not what you see. Because sometimes, it's not the dark you should fear. It's what's been waiting inside it all along. This is SpookyShade. The van rumbled down the gravel path, its tires crunching over the frostbitten earth.
The van rumbled down the gravel path, its tires crunching over the frostbitten earth. Pines loomed high above, their needles black against the dull winter sky. Inside, silence hung thick, broken only by the occasional cough or rustle of gear. 7 strangers, 1 research contract, and a forest that hadn't seen human footprints in over 30 years. At the wheel, Dr. Elaine Mercer checked the GPS again, but the signal had cut out 5 miles back. "Almost there," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Her hands were cold despite the gloves, fingers tapping a nervous rhythm against the steering wheel. In the back, Mason Burke, the survivalist and ex-military contractor, surveyed the others with narrowed eyes. He didn't trust academics, and he trusted government-funded expeditions even less. Beside him, Ava Lynn, the team's biologist, flipped through a worn notebook, pages filled with hand-drawn sketches of fungi and parasites. The destination? Site Delta 7, an abandoned weather monitoring outpost deep in the Hollow Pines forest. Official records said it was shut down after a series of equipment malfunctions. Unofficially, rumors told of strange signals, lost teams, and natural phenomena that couldn't be explained. When the van finally stopped, it was in front of a rusting gate half swallowed by the woods. Beyond it, hidden in the snow and shadow, the old outpost stood waiting. A squat metal structure, windows like black eyes staring out into the endless trees. They unloaded their gear in silence, and somewhere, deep in the woods, something shifted. Something awake. After the truck's headlights sliced through the thick fog, it came to a stop in front of an old wooden outpost with a rusted iron sign swaying in the wind. Hollow Pines Biological Research Station. Authorized personnel only. Marcus jumped down first, his boots thudding heavily against the frozen ground, eyes scanning the silent building. Not a sound, only the wind whistling through the dry pine branches, like muffled whispers. Behind him, Dr. Lillian Hart stepped down slowly, pulling her coat collar higher, her gaze piercing the darkened windows of the main lodge. "This place has clearly been abandoned for a while," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Doesn't match the report." "Government reports are always a few weeks behind," Marcus replied, eyes still fixed on the darkness slowly swallowing the forest behind the station. The rest of the team began unloading equipment. 6 in total, all trained in survival, yet no one said much. A tense, invisible veil seemed to settle over them the moment they crossed into the edge of Hollow Pines. None of them knew that tonight would be the last night. They'd still feel even a shred of peace. The silence of the forest was deceptive. Snowflakes drifted lazily from a sky the color of old bone, blanketing the world in a pristine hush that could almost be called beautiful, if not for the gnawing sense of dread crawling beneath it. The pines stood like sentinels, unmoving, their branches heavy with ice, their trunks casting elongated shadows in the pale morning light. But the real horror lay in what was missing. No birds, no animals, no wind. Only the crunch of boots against fresh snow as Dr. Evelyn Mora, head biologist of the expedition, and Dean Keller, a seasoned wilderness survivalist, followed the trail of red-stained footprints away from the camp. "Are you sure this is where he went?" Evelyn asked, her breath steaming in the air. She gripped her tranq rifle tightly, more for comfort than protection. Dean nodded grimly. "It's fresh, bleeding heavily too. Whoever it is, they're not going far." They had awoken to find Tomas Alvarez, the team's meteorologist, missing, his bed empty, sleeping bag torn, blood smeared across the inner lining of the tent. No signs of forced entry, just silence. And the tracks. They reached a small clearing where the snow was disturbed, as if someone had thrashed violently in place. Shreds of clothing. More blood. A scrap of skin caught on a pine branch. Then, nothing. No footprints leading away. No body. No predator prints. Dean knelt and touched the snow. It just ends. Evelyn stared into the woods, heart pounding. What could do this? Dean didn't answer. Instead, his eyes were fixed on the tree line where the shadows gathered too thickly, unnaturally, almost watching. Back at the camp, Dr. Magnus Rourke, the mission leader, stared at the flickering screen of the base's thermal imaging monitor. The array was acting up again, static washing over the visuals. But every few seconds, just for a heartbeat, he could see movement. Not human. Something large. Something walking upright. He rewound the footage. The same distortion, the same flicker, then 2 heat signatures standing just behind the tent where Tomas had been. And only one had left. Meanwhile, in the communications trailer, Layla Kim, the youngest on the team, was frantically trying to re-establish satellite contact. Static buzzed in her headset, distorted audio bleeding through. Half voices, half gibbering whispers. But amid the noise, a clear voice cut through. It was Tomas. His voice was faint, cracked, whispering as if from deep underwater. Don't trust the one who came back. The line went dead. Layla spun around as the door opened. Evelyn and Dean entered, pale-faced and tense. We lost the trail, Evelyn said. No body, just gone. But Layla didn't hear her. She was staring at Dean, eyes wide with fear. That's not him, she whispered. What? Layla backed away. Dean went out. 2 went out. But 1 came back. Dean just stood there, smiling. Too wide. Evelyn instinctively stepped back, eyes locked on Dean. Layla, what are you talking about? She asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Layla pointed to the monitor in the corner of the room. I just got a signal from Tomas. If it's real, then the person standing in front of us, he can't be Dean. Dean, or whatever was wearing Dean's face, tilted his head. The movement was too slow, too deliberate. I think everyone's just a little too stressed, he said in that familiar voice. But something was off, like each word was being repeated after being memorized. I just followed the trail. There was nothing out there. You imagined it, Layla. Evelyn glanced at Layla, then placed her hand on her tranquilizer gun. Dean, raise your hands, she said softly. His eyes darkened, smile still plastered on his face. I don't think you should do that, Evelyn. The air grew thick. Layla edged toward the door, trembling fingers reaching for the emergency control panel to trigger the internal alarm. But before she could press it, Dean moved. Not a run, not a lunge. He slid. His body twisted unnaturally, boneless, moving so fast Evelyn could only fire on reflex. The tranquilizer dart sank into his shoulder. Dean collapsed, but he was laughing. Not a human laugh. A dry, rasping screech that echoed from deep inside his chest. His hand twitched. His skin began to crack. Not bleeding, but splitting, like an old husk being peeled away. Beneath it, a slick, glistening mass shimmered, wet and reflective, like some deep-sea biological membrane. Layla screamed. Evelyn backed up, gun raised, but Dean had already slumped down, vanishing, as if dissolving into the air. All that remained was a thick, black slime on the floor, and an unnatural chill, as if something not of this world had just left. Meanwhile, at the biology lab on the far side of the camp, Dr. Rourke examined the strange spore sample retrieved from the ice core the day before. Under the microscope, the cells moved. They split, replicated, and worst of all, mimicked human cell structures. He whispered to himself, "This isn't bacteria, not a typical organism. It's a replication mechanism, a parasite, intelligent." The screen in front of him flickered. Data from the outer camp sensors was registering movement, scattered across the forest. They resembled human signals, but not quite right. Moments later, Rourke heard a soft knock at the door. He opened it. Dean stood there, smiling. "Sorry if I caused anyone any worry," he said. Dr. Rourke stood frozen, eyes fixed on Dean. That familiar face was now twisted into a warped, chilling smile. He stood there just as he had before, vanishing into the darkness. Unchanged, and yet entirely wrong. "Dean, you?" Evelyn stepped in, gun in hand, eyes scanning, never resting. "What's happening?" Dean turned, and in that fleeting moment, something flickered across his expression. Something no one caught in time. "There's no need to worry, Evelyn," he replied, his voice strange, distant, as if being spoken through him by something else. A shiver crept down Evelyn's spine. The air thickened, and in that moment, she felt trapped, caught between two worlds, where something monstrous and unknowable was slowly consuming the fabric of their reality. Rourke recoiled slightly. He couldn't explain it, but he felt invaded, as if his body was no longer entirely his own. But what terrified him more was the absence of any feeling. No fear, no anxiety, just silence, the unnatural stillness of a mind going quiet. "Dean, what are you doing?" Evelyn's voice cracked, no longer steady. Dean simply smiled. Not the smile of a friend, but something colder, something soulless. Then, without warning, he turned his head toward the window, where the snowstorm howled and thickened. And then came the sound. Something dragging across the snow outside. Started far off, then drew closer, heavy, unnatural. Not footsteps, but the burdened pull of something massive, something alive, and wrong. Each sound reverberated through the walls, making the room tremble as though the entire outpost teetered on the edge of a black abyss. "We can't wait any longer," Evelyn shouted. "Now move!" She dashed to the door, but as her hand touched the handle, a deafening bang shattered the silence. A burst of freezing air blasted through the cracks as the window exploded inward. Shadows poured through like wraiths, unidentifiable, writhing shapes bleeding into the room like spilled nightmares. Outside, a towering monstrosity lumbered through the storm. Only fragments of its form could be seen, a patchwork of limbs, bloodied remnants stitched together by something not of this earth. Its shape was ever-shifting, grotesque silhouettes folding beneath sheets of snow and ice. No one could breathe. Dean's eyes began to change, swelling, glistening like fractured glass, reflecting a reality not meant for human minds. His body bulged and stretched, as if breaking apart from within, only to reassemble again. Rourke turned, paralyzed, every nerve screaming, but his body wouldn't obey. Something irreversible was happening, something final. "What is this?" Rourke whispered, but no one answered. The room had fallen into a heavy, crushing silence. Only the wind, screaming through the broken seams of the station, remained. Outside, the creature crept closer, now only meters away. The sounds it made were no longer abstract. They were real, they were here, and there was nowhere left to run. Then Dean turned again, eyes grotesquely wide, his face now a twisted mask of something no longer human. I'm just," he stammered, but the words were garbled, warped, like the voice of something mimicking human speech without understanding it. A guttural roar shattered the air from just beyond the wall. "Run!" Evelyn screamed, but when she turned, Dean was gone, vanished, and in his place only the sensation of being swallowed by something vast and merciless. Something terrible had begun. The camp lights flickered weakly against the suffocating darkness, snow falling in thick, endless sheets, smothering the world outside like a nightmare slowly swallowing reality. Every breath the survivors took felt like it was being leached away by the frozen void, vanishing into the air like ghosts of life in the cold. Inside the cramped room, the only sounds were the moaning wind slipping through cracks in the walls. The atmosphere was choking. Evelyn stood by the window, staring out into the white oblivion, searching for any trace of movement. But there was nothing, only the howling storm and the overwhelming sense that something was terribly wrong. It clung to her like a film, an unseen presence slithering just beneath the surface of reality, tightening around her throat. Something's Not right, she murmured to herself, as if saying it aloud might ward off the creeping dread. But deep down, she knew no logic could explain what was happening. Dr. Rourke sat at a small desk, his eyes fixed on scattered notes, though his mind was clearly elsewhere. His gaze darkened, haunted by the image of Dean, once a trusted colleague, now a phantom swallowed by shadow. Strange sounds in the night, glimpses of motion just out of sight, of memories he couldn't trust anymore. It was all forming into something far worse than he dared admit. Dean wouldn't do this, Rourke whispered, but even he wasn't sure if he believed it. The camp sank back into silence. Then, faintly, chillingly, came the sound of footsteps, muffled but heavy. Wrong. They came from outside, crunching softly through the snow, but no one could see anything beyond the white curtain. Still, the presence drew closer. A knock at the door made them jump. Evelyn turned sharply. A figure stood just beyond the frost-rimed glass. She opened the door. No one was there, only a trail of wet footprints, dark with melted snow, leading into the camp, deep into the corridor without a sign of who or what had left them behind. "It has to be Dean," Evelyn breathed, her voice tight. She stepped into the hallway, gun clenched in her hand, senses stretched to their limit. Fear slid under her skin like ice water, prickling every nerve. Then, a loud crash echoed from outside, from the outdoor research area. Something had slammed into the door, hard. "What the hell was that?" Someone whispered from the shadows, but no one answered. Another step, heavier this time, and not human. This research station, once a remote haven from the world, was no longer just isolated. It was a trap, a silent prison where dread seeped into every dark corner. And whatever was out there in the storm was getting closer. No one knew what awaited them beyond the thinning walls, beyond the veil of snow and shadow. And as the night deepened, the darkness began to swallow everything whole. Day had come, but there was no light. The only illumination seeping through the frosted windows of the research station was a faint, colorless glow, filtered and strangled by thick layers of snow. The cold in the air was more than just temperature. It was a bone-deep numbness, a stillness that crept into marrow, felt as if everything had stopped, as if time itself had frozen, abandoning them in a lifeless void. Evelyn rose from her bed, her body heavy with exhaustion. The shadows in the camp no longer belonged to silence or isolation. They watched, they waited. The sense of being observed had rooted itself in her, an invisible tide that washed away the last remnants of peace within her mind. The wet footprints she had seen the night before were gone, but the dread hadn't left. Something had entered the station. Someone or something was already inside. "Where's Dean?" she muttered, stepping out of her room, searching for the others. The camp remained deathly quiet, but even her breath seemed to fracture the silence. She moved down the long corridor, the oppressive air growing heavier with every step. The window at the end of the hall was sealed in snow, impossible to see through, only darkness and frost beyond. And within that darkness, she heard it, a whisper, faint, distant, like voices murmuring just beyond the veil. Evelyn turned sharply, but no one was there. Still, in the corner of her eye, she saw the shape of a man slip past the hallway's edge. It was quick, too quick, maybe just a flicker of a dying light. "No?" She shook her head, trying to suppress the panic blooming in her chest. But the fear wasn't from what she saw, it was from what came next. Footsteps, outside the door again, gentle, soft, like something gliding, and then a low moan. Evelyn rushed to the door and threw it open. Nothing, no one, only that same suffocating silence, unnatural, as if the world beyond had chosen to stop existing. Another sound, this time from the lab. She couldn't ignore it anymore. She bolted toward the source, heart hammering, dread swelling with every stride. Cold air seeped from beneath the lab door, like something had opened and been forgotten. As she entered, the very air changed thicker, denser, like it was alive. Before her, the lab was a mess of chaos. Research equipment flickered erratically, Monitors blinked with static and broken code. And at the center of it all, a trail. Dark, oozing. The path of something that had slithered through, leaving behind a black smear across the floor. This wasn't just a malfunction. "We're not alone," Evelyn whispered, her eyes widening as she saw something worse. In the corner, partly veiled by shadow, a creature moved. Its body low, trailing a slick behind it, merging into the darkness as if it belonged to it. No sound, no words, only the silent glide of something that should not exist. It's too late. Outside, the storm grew wilder. The wind howled like the voices of the lost, screaming through the broken seals of the station. The camp, once a symbol of human resilience, was now a ruin of fear and broken trust, its unity shattered like brittle stone. Evelyn stared out the window, her dark eyes hollow, not from disbelief, but from the grim certainty that what she had seen could not be explained. The things out there in the snow, they were not nightmares. They were real. Life as she knew it had changed, perhaps had ended. A sudden sound behind her, sharp and jarring, shattered the stillness. She didn't turn. She only gripped the window frame tighter, her eyes fixed on the blackness outside. "Don't," she whispered. No one answered. A lab door creaked open. A figure emerged, bathed in the pale, stuttering light. Dean, or what had once been Dean. His body still stood, but his eyes, there was nothing human left in them. "We were wrong." Dean's voice cracked, broken and hollow. "We woke it up." The figure stepped forward, not alive, not dead. Just a shell moving with purpose not its own. A puppet of something ancient, something vast. Outside, the first scream tore through the air. Not human, but something older, something primal. It echoed like a call from the depths of the earth, summoning those who had slumbered beneath ice and shadow. And with that scream, the final truth broke free. These were not nightmares. These were memories, awakened. Echoes of a dark past that no human could begin to comprehend. Evelyn could feel the figure drawing closer, but she couldn't turn. She knew. Dean was gone. What stood behind her now was only the manifestation of the dark. The research station shook violently. A tremor ripped through the structure. The lights died. The world went black. They were cut off, trapped in a darkness so deep it felt alive. All was lost. But even then, as Evelyn turned at last to face what remained, she saw her reflection in a broken mirror. One black eye, empty, reflecting nothing but shadow. She was no longer Evelyn, and as the darkness embraced her, brushing her lips with a silence so complete it stole breath and thought, she understood. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something older, darker. What they had awakened wasn't the conclusion of a nightmare. It was the dawn of a new era, one where humanity would forever be imprisoned in silence, haunted by a shadow that would never leave.